So welcome to Dylan's Dialogue. Today we're talking with author, writer, yes there is a difference, and songstress, Christa Yelich Koth. So thank you for taking the time with me
Thank you so
to
much for
spend
having
tonight.
me.
I know you probably had better things to do.
Not at the moment. This is
No,
good.
not at the moment.
I'm looking forward to it.
Good. Happy to hear it. So I'll start pretty simple. What's your bio? Who is Christa?
It feels like two weird separate things. Like there's I grew up in Wisconsin and
Oh,
I
you
currently
did?
live in the
This interview
Twins.
is over.
Ah! That kind of bio. I was born and raised, blah, blah, blah. I don't know.
Where'd you grow up in Wisconsin?
Milwaukee.
Milwaukee.
Yeah.
So a big city, a lot of people.
Yeah.
Are
And I
you
came.
but you live here now?
Yes, I came here for school at the U, so I graduated with a BS in biology.
Oh,
And I've
congratulations.
been here ever since, so
Perfect. Did you do anything in biology?
I did a lot of stuff in biology.
Such as?
I worked everywhere from the Minnesota DNR
Okay,
to the Minnesota Zoo to the aquarium at the Mall of America.
excellent.
Done stuff at Como Zoo. I've worked with volunteer programs across all over in Minneapolis, different park systems, stuff like that. So
That's really exciting.
yeah, my focus was mostly entomology and ichthyology, so bugs and fish.
Bugs and fish.
Bugs and fish.
I've got my 5-year-old, Azrael, and every birthday we go to the Mall of America and we do Underwater World. You know, it's kind of a thing. His last birthday, he spent the night there.
Okay.
And he really loves it there, and we are members of the Minnesota Zoo, and we pretty frequently go to Como because we don't live too far away. When I was growing up, I wanted to be a veterinarian, so I've got a lot of interest in animals and things like that, and we have a dog and 2 cats and a couple of rats, and it's a real zoo around here. But then I found out how much math you have to do, and that killed it.
Yeah. I was a scuba diver at the aquarium. I worked there for a year. So I did all
really?
the feedings and inside the tanks and cleaning and scrubbing and all that kind of stuff. And so it was a fantastic place to work and do stuff, but it's a lot of work. And
Yeah, I believe so.
you have to learn a lot about what you're working with, too.
Yeah.
Stuff's always changing in that field, and since you're working with live things, you really need to pay attention to what's the best thing for them. So
You mean taking care of live things is harder than unlive things?
I would say yes. Just as a general rule, yes. We're gonna go with yes for this
That's
one.
a really cool
Can I ding in?
background.
Yes.
That's a really cool background. I didn't know that about you, and I think it's, we met through a mutual friend, Brian Robinson.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I met you
Awesome
first
guy.
at a Comic-Con, and I actually bought Hollow and had it signed, so that was exciting. I think it was the first release. It was years ago, and so it was.
So probably fall con or spring con then, right?
Yeah, those are the two that I go to with him.
Okay.
So yeah. So it was. I believe it was spring con because it was in the grandstand. Maybe it was fall con. Now I don't remember.
Did I have anything else out yet, or just Hollow? Do you remember?
I think just Hollow, but it was years ago, and I've got the memory of a goldfish, which now that I know you have a background in ichthyology, might be an inaccurate.
Wait, 7 seconds. What were we talking about? No, but I can place it then, because that would have been 2013.
Oh, yep, that makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I know when all the other issues came out, so I can tell.
I know there weren't any more to buy. He introduced me to you and your partner. Was that your husband or a collaborator?
Conrad Tevis, he's the illustrator.
Okay.
We actually were co-workers, and we met through work.
Sure.
And so we collaborated since then, so.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And I think I remember you telling me that. And there was only one to buy. Otherwise, I would have bought more.
Yes. That would have been 2013, so that's already 2.5 years ago. So.
Crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is.
I've been a little busy since then, just a little bit.
Just a little bit.
Put a couple other things out,
Well, so recently you released Illusion, which is that your first released novel?
Yes.
Excellent.
Hey,
there it is.
I come a little bit prepared. I was like, I don't know what I need for this. Yes, so that is my first full-length novel, book, whatever you want to call it.
Wonderful reviews.
yeah, it's been going across very well so far. It's always just amazing. Every time somebody shares that they enjoyed it, even is just like, really? Are you talking about my book? Okay, cool. You get like the little kid effect where you're just really excited about it. So far that has never gone away, even with the comics and stuff, and I hope it doesn't because it's a wonderful feeling. Of course, then you're like devastated when people don't like it, and
Right.
but
Yeah,
not everyone can like
that's,
everything, and that's okay.
I think any creator and artist feels the same way, that they really, you do it for yourself on some level,
Hmm.
but you want others to enjoy it. Otherwise, you wouldn't really do it. And so the things that are coming from your head onto the paper,
Hmm.
you want others to connect to and enjoy. And I feel that way. And I think every other person I've spoke to that does comics and does screenplays and plays and writes novels feels that same way. They're like, yeah, I do it because I need to. I need to get these characters out of my head. I need to tell that story. But I really want other people to like it.
Yeah, yeah. And as storytellers, whether it's art or written word or whatever, or music, you want to portray something for everyone else. And so when they don't get it, or they hear it or see it the wrong way, you're like, "Oh, I did something wrong because I should have done it better so you understand it more." So if it's something where it's just a style thing where people are like, "Oh, it's not my style," or "I couldn't really get into it," I'm like, that's fine. That's like any clothing. I mean, how many different styles of clothing are there? Everything is personal. But when they start to say like the writing is bad, or that's when you feel I didn't do good enough.
Yeah,
So thankfully, so far, mostly it's been people are just like, it wasn't really my flavor, and that makes me feel a little bit better that I did a good job with the writing, but it's, whatever works for you is what you're gonna enjoy. So,
exactly.
and you can't make something that everyone likes. You just can't.
For those not familiar with Illusion, it's a science fiction story.
I have to say science fantasy.
Oh, well, I agree. I agree.
Yes, and only because I've had poor reviews where people are like, this is not science fiction. Like they get really upset because there's not a lot of science in it. There's not a lot of technology. It's much more about the characters and the plot than it is about, describing how a black hole works, So
Yeah,
I've had people actually give poor reviews because they've judged it as science fiction, which is hard because you're like, it's just a category. Like, just
right. No,
so if I don't say science fiction or space opera, I can also say space opera.
right.
Then I get all this flack. So I'm trying
Star
to
Wars versus Star Trek. I get it.
exactly yes.
Yeah, and a lot of people, they do become very picky, and I write fantasy and dabble in some other things. The difference between high fantasy and low fantasy, I didn't think that was a big deal.
Yes,
There are people that feel very passionate about certain things, and that's good. You need those people in the world. Uh,
yes.
but yeah, you're right. You got to classify, otherwise people will get on you. I'm sure in future comments they'll be like, "I can't believe you called it science fiction."
But it makes it difficult because then as soon as you put it in a specific style or genre or subject, people automatically assume, oh, then it must be like every other one
Right.
in that style. Like if I say, oh, your book is epic fantasy, people immediately are like, oh, it must be 1,000 pages and have all these characters and all these backstories and all this description. And it's like, well, yes, but it doesn't have to, like when you define epic fantasy, you get an image of the book itself instead of what's inside it.
Right.
So that becomes kind of a problem too. Is it's one of the things the publishing company that I helped co-found, we're trying to break that down a little bit. Like,
Sure.
and Illusion is a good example. It has a lot of psychological drama in it. It has a little bit of romance. But not even really. Like I've had romance people read it and they're like, everybody kind of wants, more of what they are used to. And Illusion is trying to break that down a little bit, so that people who don't usually read science fiction or fantasy might come into it because they like, oh, I like mystery, I like conspiracies, I like, there's other things
Right.
about this book that might draw them in to get them in an area that they wouldn't normally read.
and I don't want to spoil anything for those that are going to read Illusion. One of my favorite things about your novel was your main character and how she was a real person. You know, there were, there's just a ton of stereotypes out there, and some stereotypes exist because it happens over and over and over.
Yes.
And one of the things that I really liked about the way you wrote her, and kind of the novel in general, but her specifically, was she's a real character with real feelings, and she wasn't reliant on a romance subplot. She wasn't reliant on any male characters around her, or for that matter, female characters around her. She looked at the world through her own eyes. And I think that's a good way to put it. Which was really exciting. It was refreshing because it doesn't happen often that you have characters that can feel and think and do things for themselves.
Well, thank you. That's a huge compliment.
So let's talk about this publishing company. I didn't know you co-founded one. So
yes. Buzz and Roar Publishing is the name of it. And we just started in January. The co-founder his name is Stuart Tighe, Tighe. And we publish books and comics, but we stick with science fiction, fantasy, and mystery. So we're a very focused thing.
Those are my top 3 favorites.
Yes, but one of the things about it is we want to pull in different genre bending, genre crossing. Like we don't want things that are just the same as what everyone else reads, because you can go to any bookstore and find that. One of the reasons this came about was Illusion was picked up by an agent. I had an agent for a while, and she shopped around and she was like, people really like it, but they don't know how to market it.
Sure.
Because it doesn't fit in a niche.
Right.
And so they're too scared to take it because they don't think they can sell it, or they don't know how to sell it. And that's their job. And I was like, okay, well, I can't take that personally because that makes sense. So I thought, well, what if I kind of started taking things in that don't quite fit, so that we can bring people in who might look at this, look at that. And, truth be told, it's been so hard, and I see why they didn't want to do it. I mean, finding your specific audience when you don't have one already created is very difficult. And more than anything else, it's been, you just kind of got to get people to just start thinking about, I'll try that. And people like their comfort zones. They really do. And they don't want to go outside of it. But the most positive feedback I've gotten is from people who I don't think they would necessarily have picked up this book on their own. And they said, okay, I'll give it a try. Or, oh, yeah, it's somebody, a friend of mine said I should read it. Or, I got it as a gift or whatever. And then they're coming back to me like, I would have never read this. This is awesome.
Right.
This makes me want to read more stuff like this, and that makes me light up. I just love that because that's what I want to do. So, for example, the first comic that we're going to be putting out, which should be out in spring, early spring, it is about steampunk. So everybody automatically goes to Victorian era steampunk, but this is actually the century before. It has more of a historical fiction vibe.
Sure.
Where it tells the story of how steampunk could have happened without some kind of mystical element, like fog that magically surrounded London, or aliens. I mean, you read some steampunk stuff and you're like, what happened? I mean, it's a very fantastical thing. So this is like, what if this really happened this way? What if something in history changed just a little bit to make steampunk an actual event that could have occurred in reality? And so it messes a little bit with what people are used to with steampunk by bringing in this historical aspect, but it hopefully will also bring people in like, oh, but there's like kind of a background, and I want to see that more, like it's an intrigue. So we do stuff like that where we're mixing and matching different parts to get other people into it that normally wouldn't.
And I think it's so important. I really do. Even from my own experiences, there are those that want to stick to what they're comfortable with, and they think of science fiction, for example, and they want the science. They want the science behind it. And then there are others that are looking for more of a space opera, and they like that setting and those characters, but they don't necessarily need to know, like you said, how a black hole works.
Right.
And then there are those that are intimidated by the preface of science because they think it's going to talk about that stuff.
Right.
They don't
Or be
want
difficult to read.
Right.
Yeah.
Fantasy suffers from the same thing. When people think of fantasy, oftentimes they go back to Tolkien, and they're like, I can't pronounce the names. I don't understand kind of the larger world around it, and oftentimes writers suffer with the concept of magic and things like that. That it gets really difficult to portray to a reader in an organic way.
Yes.
Then they get intimidated and they don't read stuff that very good authors put out that are a little more down to earth or even just as high as they would expect, but they can write it a little more clearly.
Mm-hmm.
And things like steampunk, they come with their own kind of different stereotype and definition. I think it's really cool that you're approaching it in a way that more people might connect with if they give themselves the opportunity to.
Yeah. And that, like I said, it's the biggest thing. And I've done polls in the past, and I've asked a lot of people, like, what are the things you like and don't like about science fiction? What would make you, scared to read it or not wanting to? And like you said, some of the biggest things were names that are long or hard to pronounce, a lot of excess detail that doesn't really keep the story moving forward. It's just like background, like history stuff. And anything that's like bogs down like info dumps, which is usually about the technology. I mean, if you look at it, if someone's using their cell phone, you don't stop in the story to explain how a cell phone works. You just don't. The person probably doesn't know either, and so they're not going to explain it to somebody else. It's just a piece of technology they're using. So that's kind of what I tried to incorporate into Illusion, was keeping those things in mind so that when people read my book, they wouldn't be bogged down by the stuff or wouldn't be put off by what they expect from a science fiction fantasy book. But it's difficult to do, because then the people who are very used to it, they'll rip it down because they're like, this doesn't follow the rules that I'm used to. So it's hard. Some of it's been hard to take in that way, but like I said, the positive feedback has been overwhelming and amazing, that people who wouldn't normally read that are like, I want to read the next book. I want to read, do you have other suggestions that are like this? Like, you're reading. Like, it's so
Exactly.
cool.
I did it. No, I did. So you're collaborator with Buzz and Roar Publishing. Who is it again?
Yeah. Oh, Stuart Ty.
And where did you meet him? What role does he play?
We met probably about 4 years ago, just through a mutual friend, and he did a lot of work in school with writing, so he's always had a passion for it, and he's a fantastic editor. So we kind of decided we wanted to look into this. Like last year, we talked about it for several months, and we're like, okay, we're going to just go ahead. So he does most of the editing stuff, and then I do submissions.
Sure.
So we kind of split the balance that way. But we haven't taken anything in new yet, because we're starting with kind of our own stuff, because we want to get the marketing stuff down.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to take, your book and then be like, oh, I sold 4 copies this month. Congrats.
Right.
I want to know how, like, the things to do and the things not to do. So we're using ourselves as guinea pigs, so that when we do have clients, they just get, the best that we can give them. So,
which I think is really important. And there are, my own personal experience and other writers that I've spoken with and creators that I've spoken with. It's much easier to put something from your head down onto paper than it is to market it and yourself and understand the cogs that are part of the business. And that's ultimately what it comes down to. This is a business that, publishers and agents and other people, Hollywood, for those with those aspirations, are trying to sell. And there needs to be a certain level of profitability, and there needs to be a certain level of marketability where you can gather enough people together to be interested in this product. And a lot of authors and screenplay writers and even singers and songwriters, etc., don't necessarily connect with that part of it because they're so passionate about their project. And sometimes it doesn't even make sense why people wouldn't see it the way that they do.
Yes.
Or it doesn't make sense how it's not marketable the way that you feel it's marketable, in your heart and head.
Yeah.
And there's a the business is huge. I mean, it's huge. It's media. There's nothing bigger in our world than media, aside from maybe weapons manufacturing. But we're not talking about that. And it's really difficult for people to wrap their heads around once they have created it. And so it's really cool that you and somebody else are not only learning the ropes yourselves, but able to provide a type of sanctuary for those that don't have a product that fits into a certain niche, and those that don't have the knowledge, and they can work with people who are educated on it and can help them in the ways that they don't even know they need to be helped.
Yeah. Another thing to really keep in mind as an author is the realistic numbers of books that people sell.
Yeah.
I think I finally got a hold of a research thing. It was from just a couple years ago, so it's not that out of date. But the first thing he said was authors are terrified to tell each other how many books they've sold because they never think it's a lot. Because you always hear, oh, I sold 100,000 copies. Even like I sold 10,000 copies. And almost every author that I know, they're like, it might as well be 1 million. That's crazy number. And so I actually did the research to put into what are the average sales of books, whether you're self-published or with a publishing company, for the lifetime of the book. And the numbers were tiny because there's so much in the market.
Yeah.
And this didn't differentiate if it was a book from a series or not.
Yeah.
Which I think does make a difference a lot of times in sales. But for a published, with a publishing company, the average was about 2,500 to 3,000 sales in the book's lifetime. And for self-published, it was 250 to 300 books.
Yeah.
In a lifetime. So it gave me a lot of perspective, and I've shared that with as many authors as I possibly can, because I'm like, don't freak out if you're like, I sold 50 books in the first, 3 months, and it's like, you know what? That's okay. It's really okay. Unless you're planning to not sell it anymore. That's not even the first year,
right.
And you're already a fifth of the way to average sales. Especially if it's your first book, and if it's in something like science fiction fantasy, forget it. Just you have to be so patient, and series or other books are what are going to sell the rest of your books.
Yeah.
Science fiction and fantasy is not the same as mystery or romance.
No.
And I'm not even going to get into horror because that's its own whole niche. I'm like, I call it, it's kind of like when you go to the grocery store and you get the things that you know that you like.
Yep.
And you very rarely get other things unless they're on sale.
Yep.
And you'll try them. But then you're standing, so that's all your science fiction fantasy stuff. Those are the people who just I know I like this brand. I know,
Yep.
Oh, this one's on sale. I guess I'll try it. Maybe we'll see if they'll like it, But then you're in line and you see a little impulse buy. Those are your mystery and romance. That's not saying anything is better quality or anything.
Right.
But it's usually cheaper, and it's usually something that you're like, I just need this quick fix. I just want this candy bar. I just need this,
Exactly.
I forgot I need a chapstick. Or something that it's just right there. That's how I kind of compare it. So I'm like, people are much faster to buy out of the gate romance and mystery, and they will take a lot longer in science fiction and fantasy. So any authors listening, keep that stuff in mind, especially if you're doing the self-publishing route. So,
and that reflects a lot of what I've looked up and read too, being a self-published author. And there are a lot of people with I wouldn't call it unrealistic, because don't ever shoot yourself short. And but you can think of a handful of incredibly famous and wealthy authors out of millions. And that it's a gigantic market. And with self-publishing now, every Tom, Dick, and Harry is putting out books, and that's not a bad thing. There's a lot of really talented, great writers out there, and a lot of people that probably deserve more praise than they get. Mm-hmm. But it's really hard to breach that market, Yeah. And as independents especially, they've got to rely on family and friends first, and then they start to, work on their networks and their connections. And some people's are really strong, and some people's aren't so strong. And the unfortunate thing for a lot of authors, and I think that anybody listening would agree or feel for, introverted.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of authors are very interested. So the marketing aspect is not only a nightmare, but it's uncomfortable.
Yes.
And so that's why there's so much advice out there of stay on social media and try to be present at conventions and things like that, and always make yourself present, which is 100% true. And some people just they are unable to do it. They can't connect with it because being introverted, etc. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that's where you need people like yourself with Wesner Publishing to really help them in that regard. And so I 100% agree that 250 to 300 books in a lifetime is pretty darn good.
Yeah.
for somebody that's independently published and getting out there. And I also 100% agree that series sell series.
Yeah.
And so you look at really famous examples of things like Harry Potter. That the person who picked up the third book will likely go back and pick up 1 and 2, but maybe they didn't start there for whatever reason. And
a lot of times, people who see that it's book 1, they're like, oh, especially if book 2 is not out yet. Like I've had that. I swear, my book's only been out 3 months, and almost one of the first question everyone asks me is, well, when is book 2 coming out?
Yeah.
Like immediately. And I'm like, I'm literally handing you this book. Like I just finished it.
It's still hot.
It's and it's just this automatic. So, I've also told writers too, I'm like, if you plan to do more series or anything, try and get that going before you put the first book out, just so you have something to tell people. It doesn't even have to be done. It can be, working title, whatever. But I've had more sales when I tell them, yeah, the second book's coming out next fall.
Right.
Oh, okay. Like, that'll make them do it, especially for science fiction fantasy, because they want to follow. If you find a style, an author you like, you're going to go and get all their stuff, because you already know you like their style, so you'll probably like their stories.
Yeah, no, I definitely see the point there, and I agree. One of the best articles I read, which isn't nearly popular enough, but it's talking about series and being an author and having a series planned and not having enough books out yet. Mm-hmm. And they said, don't even begin to market until you have either your series complete or you're working on new projects, etc., or you have enough books in that series that people are going to be able to hold on, for a few months to a year, because once they like it and they want to pick it up, they don't want to wait for another one.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that at first. When I released my first one, that was a real light bulb for me. It's like, well, crap, people want a second book.
Yep.
Not even close.
Yeah, that's one thing on my website. And when you go and look at my science fiction fantasy books, Illusion's the only one out, but I have 4 other books listed with summaries so that people can see, oh, there's going to be other stuff, like anything to entice them.
Right.
And like I said, especially with sci-fi fantasy, because they're delving into a whole world that's different, and it's so much time and effort that they want to stay on that as long as possible, because then, okay, I already, did the first one, so now I can just get into the story. I don't have to start over with a new world and new rules and all that kind of stuff. So
exactly.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean you have to do series. I think a lot of people think that they should, and that's not it at all. But it's mostly even if you have other books that are not in the series, let people know that too. Otherwise, you kind of get a little bit of, well, I read The Hunger Games. Well, did you read anything else by that author? No. Do you even know the author's name? No. It's kind of, you get a little bit that kind of niche thing too, where you don't know the author, and that's where the social media thing comes in that you were talking about. As the book becomes popular, but you don't even know the author if they have other stuff. You just hear about the one book. So
yeah, I think that's a real media product, because a lot of the, you think of Game of Thrones and Harry Potter and Narnia and things like that, and they're all series, and it makes sense that Hollywood and other producers and whatnot would stick to a series. for those that are trying to get produced on something bigger than just novels. Also, publishers, if they can grab on to a successful series, they want to do it because it's guaranteed income for the future as long as it's
Yes.
well written and well done. So it makes sense that series are a very popular thing, but that's really media based because a lot of series didn't exist before. I mean, I wouldn't say recently. I mean, they've been around forever, but individual novels and individual stories were really the go-to for a long time. And you can think of, again, a handful of authors that are very, very successful, and we'll throw out Stephen King because who doesn't know him? He wasn't a series guy. It
Right.
was individual story after individual story after individual story, and he built up a big enough resume and a big enough bibliography that it worked for him. He didn't need a series, and a lot of authors don't. And so for those that are struggling conceptually or have a lot of things that they want to do that have nothing to do with one another, that's okay.
Yeah. And that's a really good example of people say, "Do you read Stephen King?"
Yep,
Not, "Did you read The Shining and Carrie and, all that kind of stuff." It's like
exactly.
they go by the author name because it's not just a series that they read one series and that's it.
And that is a great.
So that kind of, again, that's the social media part too for nowadays, is you don't want people to only read one thing that you've done.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it'd be great to make millions of dollars and just write a trilogy and, be settled. But
Well,
most authors I know also really like writing. Like, it would be great to make enough money to have it be a living, but we also want to be able to continue to write.
exactly.
So we don't want to get stuck where, yeah, your other stuff was okay and only be known for this. Like, it's kind of, I assume actors would be similar, where they don't want to be just that one role and then
Right.
whatever else they do, people are like, yeah, it's all right.
And there are a ton of really talented actors out there that are not Brad Pitt.
Mm-hmm.
there's just there's a lot of people that don't get undue praise and a lot of people that get too little praise.
Yes.
So for you obviously have a background in education and biology, and you've been around the block there, and you've worked at a lot of really cool jobs. When and why did you start writing? When did that, why is that your passion now, and why is that where you kind of led your life?
I kind of got into writing probably in high school, just with friends. I actually went to high school, an arts high school, but for vocal music, I was a singer.
Yep.
So I did opera and classical for high school. So I didn't really think about writing as anything more than, this is fun. Like, we'll write this story. And so once I was out of high school, I kind of just kept writing stuff, and I had this idea of a girl who wakes up in a room with no windows and she has no memories, but it wasn't creepy. Like, I didn't want that there's a dead body next to her, or
And a
she's covered
tentacle
in
comes to
blood,
the
or
door.
which always seems to happen in those kind of. It was just, she just wakes up and, like, there's just nobody there, and everything is very sterile, and she's just like, hello, and I reread kind of what I had written, and I got to the end of it, and I was like, well, now I kind of want to know what happened to this
Right.
girl and why she's here. And so, since I don't ever know how my books end until I write them, I had to keep writing it. And what happened was, I worked at a Natural History Museum in Milwaukee, and I had a wonderful coworker who I would come in every day and tell her what I wrote, like, the day before. And after a couple weeks of this, she said, well, when are you gonna, be finished so you can publish it? And it was like a foreign language. Like, I'd never thought about publishing. And I was like, you mean, like, other people read it?
This isn't just for me? Since when?
So weird. And it literally was like this, like, switch where I just said, maybe I could do that. And I started looking at writing as, okay, I'm gonna write this book and see where it goes. Um, and so, in the process of shopping it around, and I had an agent and all this kind of stuff, the comic books kind of just happened. Like, I wasn't really into comics. I wasn't a big comic book person. But I had this short story that I really liked, and I met my coworker, who he was a talented artist, and that just kind of, it happened so much faster because it's kind of like working on a short story instead of a full-length novel. And so that came out, the first one, in 2012. Even though it's 3 years later, I've been working on the novel much longer than those. And don't get me wrong, I mean, that took a couple of years to put together. But it was this very strange, like literal mind clicking, bulb idea thing where it was like, oh, I could I could publish and maybe do this for a living. So, it's kind of been my goal. I work part time so that I can write, and I do the publishing company, and that helps pay the bills. And in the meantime, I just keep putting stuff out and working on it and seeing what I make off of it, and if it's enough to live on.
So your collaborator, he sounds, for Hollow,
Mhm.
uh, sounds like a really good guy. I met him briefly, and I mean, he he and I got along as far as I remember the years ago. Uh, but it seems like you and he clicked and were able to put out a really excellent product. And Hollow is a very interesting story, and I've only read how many are in this series now? How many do you have out?
Hollow's Prism actually just put out issue number 4 in
Okay,
October.
okay, because I have two of
Okay.
them, and I didn't know how far it went. I knew I was behind.
Yeah.
But he seems like a really good person to be working with, and is obviously very talented. So for those that want to create comics and collaborate on comics, I've heard a ton of horror stories, including my own. I've tried to collaborate a couple of different times, and I had artists that were notoriously unreliable. Even
Yeah.
though I fronted things, all the financing and et cetera was all on me, and it never worked out. So when you are looking for somebody to collaborate with, aside from you got to be able to trust them. I thought I could, and I think a lot of other people thought that they could with theirs. What do you look for that is that quality in that person that is going to guarantee that your product is at the very least going to release? Do you know what I mean? It's a hard question.
Yeah. I think it was kind of two things for me. The first one was you have to find an artist who is willing to understand that it is your story that they are drawing.
Sure.
And that doesn't mean that they can't suggest things or add things, or even some situations where you're like, can you kind of just make this foresty background? Like decide, like give them like
Just
leeway in
make
that
this
sense.
happen.
But as soon as they start trying to tell it themselves, that's where I found a lot of the problem comes from, because it's the butting heads thing where they're like, well, it's not how I would draw it. And I'm like, well, then you can write your own story. Like
Right.
I need someone to draw art for my story. The story's already done. So and because as a writer, you usually have at least a feeling of how you want the story to go.
Yep.
They kind of have to understand that they're representing your story the best way that they can, but it's still for you as the writer.
Which I think is really good advice.
Yeah.
People probably
And,
struggle with it. I imagine that most people finding artists, it's their friends.
yeah.
People that are talented and can do what you can't. I can't draw stick figures.
Yeah, I can.
And so I think they get tough when it comes to the butting of heads, because it's your friend and you want to be able to trust them and they want to be able to trust you. But everybody has a completely different idea of what should be happening,
Yeah.
in everything. And so it is important to have a concept that one person is pushing forward in the right direction because it's conceptually theirs. At least on smaller projects, when you get to really big things that involve multi-millions of dollars, then yeah, have a few heads in there.
Yeah,
You know?
definitely.
Yeah, but it's really good advice that you'd say, that it's your project, it's your story, and you need to be able to, and they need to be able to understand that.
Hmm. And then the second thing would be, for the other side of it, is the artist needs to let you know realistically what they can get done. And because it's a lot of, yeah, I can put out, 4 pages penciled a week, and then, 2 weeks go by and you have 3 pages, and you're like, because as the writer, you're already putting, okay, then that gives me 3 months for this to be done, and then, because you have to get ready to do the marketing and do all this stuff and plan the publishing date and all that. And so especially people who haven't done a lot of projects or have only done their own projects, they tend to maybe, they want to impress and say, oh, I can do this, I can do that. And it's like, really decide like what you can do in a certain amount of time. If you can do 4 pages a week, awesome. If you can only do 1, awesome. But let your writer know, and then make sure you guys are checking in. It's hard because you're like, I don't want to like push them or pressure them, but the artist is like, well, I don't want to feel like I'm behind.
Right.
You got to do it. You just have to suck it up and be like, this is a job, and I need to tell you, I'm getting less done than I thought, or I'm kind of ahead. Do you have more pages for me? Do you have more script ready? Just communication is so important. But just remember, you both are doing work on this.
Right.
And so really, really pay attention to the time frame. And of course, things also come up. People get sick. People have to go out of town. All that, be okay with that too. Like, don't plan things to the letter so much that you're like, okay, and 8 weeks, we're done. No matter what, and then like someone's house burns down and you're like, I don't care.
Yeah,
like go to the library and draw there. Stuff like that. So I hope nobody's house burns down. That's terrible. But
if it does, get the job done.
Yeah. So it's not only setting that realistic goal, but then touching base with each other about it. And it's so hard, especially when you don't know the other person.
Yeah.
When you're going with a stranger, because you're a little bit more leery. But then when you're working with someone there's also that, I don't want to mess up our friendship by being a, crazy, like, keep going, like, forever, faster, whipping you, that kind of person either.
So it sounds like communication is really important, and
yes.
that most artists should use the under-promise, over-deliver method.
Yes. Think of Scotty from Star Trek, where he's always promising, I can only get it done in 4 hours, and then, 2 hours later he's finished, and he looks great then,
Exactly.
But it just makes everybody happier. And it also, for the artists, they feel less pressure. But I do know a lot of artists, too, who, and a lot of art people in general, if you give them a week, then they do it in the last 12 hours, So that's why the checking in thing helps, for me at least, is just to be like, how did this week go? I kind of crammed everything in. And I'm like, okay, I don't want crappy product, like, you don't want crappy product. We're putting our names on this. That was something huge with Hollow, was I was like, I don't want people to say, oh, this looks like her first comic book.
Yeah.
And I've never had anyone say that, because we really made sure we went back, we checked all of the consistency, color stuff, everything, and to the point where Conrad was like, nobody's going to notice this, Christa. And I was like, I noticed it. And I'm not even an artist. So I know artists are going to notice this. But that's really important. But it just takes a lot of time. Like, it's hard to make yourself wait to put something out. But I can guarantee if you put something out that is lower quality, it's always going to be there. And truth be told, the excuse of it was my first one doesn't fly with a lot of people.
No. And you got to understand your audience, and with comic books, it's appealing to the audience. I think in some ways is even a little bit harder, because they're a little more critical. They know what they're looking for. And I think anybody that is producing something has to understand that their audience, they're not going to please everyone. Some people are going to love it no matter what, and then you've got that middle ground where if you're going to write, you've got to realize that some writers are going to read it, and they're going to be looking for things that not necessarily the general public will be looking for.
Right.
And they might have better critique, little critique, a lot of critique, depending on kind of what it is.
Because we've all gone through the same process.
Exactly.
So we know what to look for, yes.
And you'll find that, I think, in comics as well, I'm sure you could attest to it, that a lot of artists are going to be reading and looking at your work. And so that's a lot of the critique is going to come from people who are familiar with that format, with that type of media. And so that's part of understanding your audience. Well, yeah, maybe the general populace might not notice that shift in color. The artist that does see it is going to be more likely to write a review on it.
Right. Exactly.
So that's important. So you've done comics and you're currently writing novels, but you have a background in singing.
Yes.
And so your stage name, remind me?
Renee Cole.
And why did you pick Renee Cole?
Yeah.
And
What's
so,
that?
why did you pick Renee Cole?
Renee is my middle name,
Okay.
and Cole is letters from my last name. So
That makes sense.
because my last name is very long and complicated, so I picked 2 letters from one and 2 letters from the other and put it together.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's not a bad. So you have released one album?
3 singles. The
3
whole album
singles.
is not out yet. Yeah.
And are you still doing, like, are you still singing? Are you still writing and doing that stuff?
I'm kind of on hiatus. I had to get a new computer. So the software that I had was somebody else's because it was their computer.
Yeah.
So I have to re-get all of the programs to do the recording. So I have all the equipment and everything. I just have to get it for my system.
Sure.
And the writing stuff kind of took priority money-wise. So I haven't purchased anything yet. So I don't think I've actually done any recording since last summer.
Sure.
Like 2014 summer.
That's better than like 2005.
Yes, no. Yes. I think everything came out within the past 5 years.
Okay.
And
Really
I'd love to finish the album. I mean, I have most of the songs done. I just have to record them. But it's mostly just time and priority for money that I had to shift focus but yeah, they're all on iTunes and they're just, they're out there.
Are you the singer-songwriter or do you have
Yep.
a writer?
Yep.
And you write the music as well?
I do indeed.
So you're the whole package.
I'm the whole musical package. I kind of the tap dancing
Yeah.
movement.
No, that's because that keeps you pretty prolific. I mean, you've got a lot of different sides of you that you're able to put out there artistically and creatively, and I think that people probably resonate with that, and I'm sure that you've met a lot of really interesting people and have set up a pretty good network based on something that I don't know if you ever thought you were going to do. I mean, you went into school for biology and now you kind of took a completely different route. And it sounds to me like a route that not only are you comfortable with, but you're going to be successful with.
Yeah. But, if you think about it, though, science fiction, fantasy does mix very well with biology.
That's true.
I mean, a lot of the things that I have worked with are some of the weirdest looking creatures on the planet. And so you get to incorporate some of that into your alien species or your weird plant life and stuff like that when you write
Sure.
not on this world. So I think I've definitely pulled a lot from what I've learned. So I feel like I'm using my degree in a lot of ways.
Good.
In writing.
That's really important.
Yeah.
It really is. Nobody wants to get a degree that they never use.
That's true.
It's very frustrating.
Yeah.
So for those that are interested in you and your work, where's the best place to start? I mean, you released a novel and you have Hollow out and you've got some music projects, but where should they start to get to know you? Like, where should they go to see kind of who you are? Do you have a blog or a website or anything like that where they can, get a better feel for who you are beyond this?
Yeah. I mean, I'm on Facebook. People can definitely find me on Facebook. And most of my Facebook stuff is pretty related to my writing. And I also have a blog that's just myname.com.
Sure.
So, and that has links to all of my stuff. The writing or the music I keep kind of separate. And that's, I'll talk about it every once in a while, but that was mostly, I love to do it, but I don't want to be a performer.
Sure.
I did a lot of that in high school and some in college, and it was great, but it is, again, it's so time consuming that,
Sure.
You gotta kind of pick your priorities, and I knew that I wanted to do writing more, as much as I love singing and songwriting. So I do the music because I like getting it out, and if people like it, that's great, but that's not what I push usually.
Sure.
Push, that's a weird word, but so I would say probably either Facebook or my website would be the best, that you can kind of peruse all of the stuff that I've done, my website especially, and just check out summaries of the books I'm working on, or there's a lot of art and pictures from the comic books, and so whatever area that you have an interest in, you'll find a section for it. Plus, I do a really fun post on Thursdays.
Yep.
Called Theoretical Thursday, which is random, and it's basically a hypothetical question, and mostly I did it because I wanted to interact with people besides just, look, I'm writing, like, and I have gotten some amazing answers, some just really creative stuff that comes from people's minds. And it can be anything from, would you rather have the ability to run really fast or be invisible?
Right.
Or to something like, if you could only see one other color besides black or white, which color would you pick?
Yeah.
So it's a whole range of things, and some of it's inspired by movies or books I've read or things going on in my life, and so that's a little bit of a personal touch, I think, versus some blogs that are just, today I wrote 10,000 words, which actually that's amazing. If you wrote 10,000 words in a day, that would be incredible, because that's a lot of words.
That is a lot of words.
Yeah, that's what I would recommend.
Yeah, good. And so let's talk a little bit more. I know that you've got other things to do. I won't take too much more of your time here. Just a couple more questions, if that's okay. What other hobbies do you have outside of writing and singing and doing it? What else do you like to do as a person? Who are you?
I don't know, all different stuff. I salsa dance.
Oh, do you?
I do. I've been doing that for probably about 4 years.
So you're pretty good.
I would say yes. I actually was an assistant teacher at one of the studios in the Twin Cities for a couple of years. So I do enjoy doing that. I haven't done as much, just been more busy, but It's a really fun way to just get out, and you can be social but not be social.
Sure.
It's kind of nice. So for introverts, it's always great. But it's also a great way to just be physical and get your butt out of the chair when you're writing all day and go do stuff.
Wait, there's an outside world?
Yeah, I know.
I like it.
But it's, and there's a lot of kinds of dancing out there too, but it's one of those things where, like, it's usually pretty cheap to go to, if you do lessons or whatever.
Yeah.
Everybody's usually really friendly, and you don't ever have to go again if you don't like it. Like, there's not an obligation, or if there's a place that you try and you're like, I didn't like that vibe, don't go there. Like, there's multiple things to choose from in the dance world. Otherwise, I'm an avid reader. I'm always reading multiple books at a time, which is great. For me, I love it. And I think as a writer, that's one of my goals too, is if people can feel what I feel when they read my books, then I'm doing it right.
I've always been too much of a purist. When I start a series, I have to start at the beginning, because that's me. And I can only read one thing at a time, and I have to finish it, otherwise it drives me crazy. I don't have a very OCD personality, but when it comes to reading, I really do. I've got to start at the beginning, and I can only read one book at a time.
Okay.
Most readers that I talk to are more like you. They have multiple things going on, and they like to be in different places with different characters.
I do usually try to read in order, at least the order that the author wanted the books read in, which, like, Narnia is a good example. Like, a lot of times they do them chronologically now, so you don't actually start with Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. And, but I'm like, well, the author wrote them this way for a reason, so that's the way I'm going to read them. But I have no qualms anymore about stopping a book if I don't like it. Like you said, there's so many books out there, and there's so many untapped authors that people don't. I want to try a lot, but I'm like, I can't. If you didn't put the work into it, or if I am not getting into the story, it doesn't. I don't need to spend time on it.
Yeah,
I get reading something else I like.
Yeah, there's a few, the few that I've put down. I'm pretty selective about what I read, and maybe that's a problem. I'm the general audience there. I need to branch out a little bit, but I'm pretty selective about reading. Anything that I've put down hasn't necessarily been because of the author's effort put in. Most of them are pretty good. I just didn't click with the story. It just wasn't for me. Either the characters weren't that interesting, or the setting wasn't that. There's something about it that just didn't click with me.
Yeah, but I've also met authors who have changed over time, where they're like, I used to always read to the end, and now I'm like, I just want to read something I like, so I'm going to try something else and put this down, and it's okay, because whatever happened to them, they're still gonna do it. It's the book's written. Those characters will have their ending. Ooh.
Thanks again for spending some time with me. I just have one last question for you, if you could message it back to me. If you had a number one piece of advice to give out to collaborators, writers, singers, creators, etc., what would it be?
The one piece of advice that I would give to other people in the arts is to share your work with others before you publish it or before you make it available to the public. That can be really scary and hard. Nobody that I know likes to do it, but you have to have other people see it beforehand. They're going to catch things that you're going to miss. And it's the best way for you to make your product, which is what it is, the best possible. So go to conferences, go to conventions, go to workshops, talk to people, see if you can ask them questions. A lot of people are really friendly and willing to talk to you and look through your stuff if they have time. And take what you can from them and throw the rest out. Whatever's going to make your story or your piece of art or your song better, take it. Be thankful that someone else found it before you put it out there. Make the changes, and then when you do put your stuff out there, you know you've put out the best thing you possibly can. So that any negative feedback you get later, you know it's not because you did a bad job. It's their personal preference or their style preference, and there's nothing you can do about that. So make sure you do the work to get it the best possible. And one of the best ways to do that is to let other people see it. And hang in there. Good luck.